start with a bit of a context, because I know that we don't know much about each other, which is not good, very sad. But I was talking to one of the comrades outside that our media is very busy talking about the politics, not the politicians, not the politics, that it doesn't have time to speak about the real and important issues. But Sudan is 67 years old. We gained independence in 1956. And since then, 50 years of that age was ruled by military dictators who actually came to power through coup. And each coup had a political party alliance that provided the coverage, the political coverage for the dictator, basically. So 13 years of democracy that were actually transitioning democracy. And the country went through 5 transitions trying to lay the foundations of a respectful state, of institutions, of a sustainable democracy for 5 times. The first one was in 56 after the independence, immediately. The second one was in 64 after a popular revolution that took a dictator down. And then in 85, which was also a popular revolution that took the second dictator down. And then in 2005, after the CPA, that was followed by the secession of the South Sudan. And then again in 2019, after a third popular revolution that took a third dictator down, and still it didn't work right for us. We're not in the right place now. So more a bit of a context, more than the Sudan governments have signed more than 40 peace agreements. 40 peace agreements. None of them was capable to sustain more than 5 years. None of them. And we've been in civil war in different parts of the country since independence, literally. The war in South Sudan was going on for more than 50 years. It's the longest civil war in the continent. And then even before the CPA was signed, Darfur was in the action. And then Nuba Mountain was in the action. Blue Nile was in the action. This is basically half of the country being in civil war, serious civil war. We're 40 million. Out of the 40 million, more than 6 million are displaced forcefully, either inside the country or refugees. So it's not a pretty picture, but you can imagine why would people revolt, basically, in such a context and in such a country. Now, 90% of the people, while the dictator, the last dictator, the regime, argued that it's only 70% of the population are under the poverty line, it's like the numbers are talking about 90% of the population are under the poverty line. And we're not a poor country. Like all the other African countries, we're not poor. We don't have business with being poor and underdeveloped. It's just politics. Yeah. Now, fast forward, the two nearest elections in the country were in 2010 and 2015. And the civil society, very close to the political parties in the opposition, had different strategies to tackle these two elections. In 2015, in 2010, it was during a transitional period where the South Sudan was not separated yet. And the decision of the opposition party and basically the civil society close to it, and I will explain how close it is, decided to go and compete against the regime in these elections. And the mobilization started, the organization started, a wide coalition was formed like elsewhere. And then right into the elections, like 2 weeks before the voting day, the coalition collapsed because of bad politics. And the main candidate for presidential race actually withdrew, leaving the dictator by himself. That was one experience. There is a lot to unfold about this, definitely, but this is how it went. Now, in 2015, the highlight of what the grassroots movements did is that they organized a campaign called Girifna, and Girifna means we're fed up. And the only and sole demand or goal of this campaign was to take the NCP, which is ANC, to take NCP down through these elections, and that's it, nothing else. We're not letting NCP win. Who are the other candidates? We don't care. We don't ask. How are we going to vote or not vote? Is it boycott? Are we going to ruin the ballots? What's going to happen? It's just we're taking them down. All these are options. We're just taking them down. Whoever wants to be part of any of these options is welcome. It's just NCP is not winning in these elections. It was rigged eventually, and they won. Now, there was anticipated elections in 2020. And a very similar debate was being in place between the civil society organizations and the grassroots organizations, basically discussing about what are we going to do about the 2020 elections. Now, I'm going to simplify this. It's not that simple. The debate was not that simple. I'm going to simplify it. The political parties, the bigger political parties, and the trade unionists, most of them were thinking that we should run in the elections and we should try and achieve the change through the elections. Grassroots and the youth were talking, change is not going to be brought by elections. It is a revolutionary act and nothing else. We shouldn't engage in these elections. We shouldn't wait for these elections. It's like we have to mobilize the population and we have to work through revolutionary acts against the regime, and we're not putting these 2020 elections in our plan at all. What happened is that in many convenings, this discussion was in place, and it actually almost broke relations between many activists. I've lost some of my personal friends because of such a debate, basically, because it's about the very existence of us as people in this country, because the regime was basically killing, capturing, abducting, forcefully disappearance was in place. The country was in war. It's a serious question. It wasn't one other occasion that we can pass by and then see if it goes well, if it doesn't go well, whatever it is. No, it was a very serious thing. Now, I want to say that probably the grassroots movements and the youth won, because the revolution started in 2018 in December, and al-Bashir, who's the dictator, was taken down on April 2019, even before the elections happened. But there was a setback, and we haven't seen a civilian-led government until August 2019. So the Sudanese people were actually in the streets since December 2018 until August 2019. It's almost like how many? 9 months? 9 months of constantly being in the streets. It's almost like universities did not function, schools did not function properly. Most of the people, it came right before the COVID, but everything was shut down in Khartoum, and not in Khartoum only. One important feature about this revolution is that it didn't start in Khartoum. It didn't start in an urban area. It started in a very small village called Rabak, to the east, to the southeast of the country. And when it started, it was a very simple act of rejection by high school students when they went to school and tried to buy their breakfast sandwiches, and they found out that they were very expensive for them to buy overnight. The bread prices were rising, and these young women, young ladies, and young guys actually went into the streets expressing how angry they are, that they cannot buy their breakfast anymore. What happened is the civil society was prepared enough to pick on the local initiative. And this is what actually happened. Because what was put in place is that we were planning a march to the parliament on December the 25th. And this demonstration in Rabak happened in December 19th. There was a planned march to the parliament, and the demand of it was raising the minimum wage. We were in a completely different planet than the local initiative. But when the local initiative happened, we picked it up. No one was stubborn, no one was arrogant, no one was thinking that, no, this issue is more important than what the schoolboys and girls are thinking. We picked the initiative. Now, at the same time, I don't want to reflect, or I don't want to give you the idea that this was an incident or a coincidence. No, it wasn't. Resistance was kept alive in grassroots, basically, and in big politics, both at the same time, for years. Because we tried. Before we arrived at 2019, we tried in 2009, we tried in 2010, we tried in 2013, we tried in 2015. That was popular uprising. It wasn't the elections thing. And every time we were defeated. We were defeated by the police, the security, the military, the alliance, these alliances with the corrupt politicians, these alliances with the private sector, when they started firing people because they were in the demonstrations. We were defeated many times before we arrived at 2019. But when it came to 2019, we had the lessons learned, actually. And what is more important is that each defeat did not mean that the resistance is going to be killed. No, resistance is kept. And every kind of resistance, any kind of rejection act to a policy, to a politician, to injustice, to anything you can name it, it's called resistance to us. And it's embraced, and it's understood, and it's put in the context of the politics, eventually, even if it is about services, even if it is about personal freedom, it's also politics. It's political, even if it is about women's participation in local councils, it is about politics. It's all brought into context. Now, I want to talk about how the critical mass was actually considered and built, because resistance else in everywhere in the country, Sudan is a big country. How did this contribute to this critical mass that actually burst into the streets on April 6th of 2019 and made al-Bashir to resign, and it actually made him vanish. We haven't seen him after that. It was claimed that he was put in prison, but no one is sure, and I will tell you the story later on. How the pushback actually failed us. Because the power settlement, that doesn't happen in a click of a hand. The system taking the dictator himself, taking the face down, doesn't mean that you took the system down. It doesn't mean that the regime has been dismantled, right? What the civil society was doing, in particular, what was our contribution in this building of the critical mass, is that we invested, and we listened carefully to the local initiatives, and we took it seriously, and we invested in it. Whenever you go and provide school or water or sanitation or whatever it is, it comes with civic education. It doesn't come as dry service. It comes with civic education. It's always right-based. It's always, when we dig a well and put a pump into it, we hand it over to the community committee. We don't hand it over to the government or the local government. We give it to the community committee. And we teach them how to collect a tariff, how to maintain it, how to keep it theirs, not to give it to not to surrender what you have in your hand. Your property is not the government's. If the government didn't do it, it doesn't mean that we'll do it and give it to it. No, it's still ours. It's our resources. That was one thing that we did. We held convenings like this many times, like I could say hundreds of times, where these discussions are held in safe spaces. Actors who wouldn't sit together outside this convening would come and sit inside this convening because it's safe, and they know they can talk to each other. These convenings actually invited in political parties as well. It wasn't only civil society. It brought in political parties, because democracy and elections, you cannot play this game with football clubs. You need political parties to play the game, huh? So we did accuse them. They did fail us eventually, and they did us wrong in many occasions, but we didn't actually boycott them. We didn't cut them off the change or the discourse that we're trying to achieve. And at the same time, the civil society actually put its resources, its human resources, at the dispense of the political parties. If they cannot think strategically, if they cannot take meeting minutes, if they cannot facilitate safe spaces, if they cannot connect to the grassroots, we'll do it for them. We'll teach them. We'll work for them. We were actually facilitators in a number of political parties' coalitions where we brought the know-how and the skills that we have and put it on the table for their expense, for the dispense. Now, the roll-up that happened, there were many convenings like this, and many trials, and many organizing convenings, community organizing convenings, and education to the community as well. But I'd say that big politics had its attention as well. It wasn't only grassroots. It was about connecting this grassroots to the big politics and making it capable of achieving the change up there. Because you can change in local level, but never go to the political governance thing or the economic governance thing. What we were busy doing in this arena, I want to share with you one example that is quite, I think it's very important to think of when you are at such a stage. There was a research project that was collectively conducted by civil society organizations, and the main theme of it was alternative development paradigm, alternative policies, economic policies, social policies, monetary policies, you name it. And it is, in collection, it is supposed to produce an alternative development paradigm. That was one of the areas where the civil society was busy working on, and it wasn't funded, by the way. No donor was interested in funding such an endeavor. But financial solidarity works for civil society as well. Our resources can make change, by the way, and we can produce solid things out of our own resources. Now, the last thing, and I'm going to close up with this. As I said, it wasn't a coincidence. There were many trials very close to the 2019 revolution itself. And the tool of it was speaking to the principles, the very important principles to the people. We had a declaration that was called the Declaration of Freedom and Dignity. The Declaration of Freedom and Dignity brought in civil society, grassroots, and political parties and trade unionists together in the attempt of changing the regime, basically. That was development into the Declaration of Freedom and Change. Now you see the names of the declarations are so principled, are so direct. It's not about democracy and change and declaration of democracy and building and construction of change and positive and whatever. No, it's just dignity and freedom. Freedom and change. But basically, what these declarations contained were not vague. The name was a slogan, but the content of it was not vague. It was very particular and to point. It was like 9 points that we want this country to change from. If we want the change from A to B, these 9 issues should be changed for us to arrive at B. That's it. Simple. And at the same time, while this organization is centralized, resistance is decentralized. And when the action is centralized, it's fed by the decentralized issues of the people. I mean, if the demonstrations would be planned nationwide, for example, okay? And the demonstrations in Khartoum are of a particular importance because this is where he sleeps, basically, where he does his business, where his close circle is. But when we are chanting for example, freedom, peace, and justice, and we're chanting and saying just fall, and we're chanting and saying military to barracks and Janjaweed to be resolved, these are so generic issues, huh? But inside the demonstration, there are other people chanting about Darfur, for example, chanting about the small farmers, for the small farmers, in the capital city, where they have never been heard, where they have never been prioritized. Now you bring them in the central demonstration, and they see themselves there, basically. Yeah. And actually, there was a chanting, very interesting one, talking to the police about how poor they are. It goes like, يا بوليس ماهيتك كم؟ ورطل السكر بقى بك كم? It's like a question to them. How much is your salary and how much 1 kilo of, 1 pound of sugar is? They were very violent at that time, and the demonstrations talked to them directly about their interest in change. You have stake a change, basically. Now, it is central, but it still listens to what comes from the grassroots, and it actually responds to the changes that are happening. The last thing I'm going to close with is having a theory of change is very important. Change doesn't come about out of a demonstration, or no matter how strong it is, it doesn't achieve change. And actually, although the dictator fell down, we did not realize change in Sudan till now. We fall into civil war. Thank you.